Hello everyone, let's have ourselves a chat. I'm John from Rusty Chains, and today our chat is about Killing Floor 3. The beta is finally here, and I got to really sink my teeth into it. I'm pretty excited. I really enjoyed the previous games in the series, and I've been following this new entry pretty closely. The series has always had fantastic gunplay and animations, and the melee in KF2 is some of my favorite ever in a first-person game. So that's why I was surprised a bit at how much KF3 changed its formula. The first two games are pretty similar in their gameplay and mechanics. Some Zeds gained a few new abilities and the Edars were added, but for the most part KF2 was just an iteration on the existing Killing Floor. KF3, however, is a pretty big departure in a lot of areas. Previous games had a few different game modes, but the main bread and butter of the series was always survival. That was a wave-based horde shooter. You gained money for bigger and better weapons as you fought more plentiful and more challenging enemies while going through the waves. Now, the previous games allowed you to choose between 4, 7, and 10 waves. After finishing them all, you had to tangle with the unique end boss. KF3 is always 5 waves and then a boss, but waves in between sometimes have mutators to keep things fresh. So far in KF3, survival is the only mode, so the general concept is still the same. The first game had one boss, the Patriarch. The second game entered early access with one boss, but eventually concluded its run with 5. As KF3 hits store shelves, we're starting out with 3, all of which are new to the series. However, balance and mechanics during the actual matches have gotten some pretty big shakeups, like I said. The biggest change has been pretty controversial in the Killing Floor community. We actually did a whole video dedicated to it back in October with some more detail, but the general gist is this. In past games, you picked your character and customized them cosmetically, and then you picked which perk to play as, which is basically a class with skill trees that upgrade. So if I liked Mr. Foster, I would select him, and then choose if I wanted to run the next match as a Berserker, a Commando, a Firebug, so on and so forth. That's not an option in KF3. Perks are replaced with a new Specialist system, essentially making it kind of similar to a hero shooter. You pick your specialist, and they come with the class, skill tree, and special abilities. So if I'm choosing Mr. Foster in Killing Floor 3, that means I always have to play him as Commando, because Tripwire said Foster is the Commando. You can select and equip weapons from other specialists during a game, but your skill trees and abilities are still locked to each character, which I'm not a fan of, because if you don't like the writing or acting for a specialist, you're shit out of luck. Now let's take a moment to actually meet the specialists. Mr. Foster is the Commando, like I said. He specializes in assault rifles. Now his gadget or ability, whatever you want to call it, is a little drone that hovers around him and also shoots at nearby enemies. Now canonically he's a clone of the original Mr. Foster, but I guess it was too expensive for Tripwire to clone his vocal cords because he's got a new voice actor. He does a good job, but I much prefer KF2 Foster. Considering the game is first person and his face is always hidden by a gas mask, this could have been a new character if they weren't bringing the voice actor back. Anyway, he's fun enough to play. Commandos, as always, remains a solid option for a high fire rate and good crowd control with its weapons. Next up is Imran, the Technician. He's really good with shotguns and heavy ordnance. Aside from shotguns, he also gets a grenade launcher and some lasers. Now his gadget is to grab the biggest subwoofers you've ever seen, and fire sonic blasts at enemies for massive damage. He's also the only specialist to start with a purchasable multi-tool, which is what activates ziplines, map turrets, and opens armor containers. I had a pretty good time with Imran. He's simple, but his gadgets and his upgrades are pretty fun. Devlin is the Firebug. Now with a title like that, I don't really need to explain what she gets up to. Her special ability is she releases a high damage shockwave that shoots fire everywhere. Now, unfortunately, Devlin is the poster child in my mind for the failures of the specialist design philosophy. There's 4 Firebug-specific weapons in the beta, and I don't like 2 of them. The starting SMG's incendiary rounds seem to just send fire all over the place once an enemy is hit, rather than a satisfying burn on your actual targets, and the flamethrower offers really no feedback whatsoever. I could power through that for the pretty fun final gun, but I don't like Devlin that much as a character either. She's one of those high-energy, quote-unquote, quirky, cocky characters. There was a fine line on writing them in an entertaining way, or, for lack of a better word, a cringe way, and Devlin falls into that latter category for me. I hate this expression, but she seems like the type of character that would turn around and go, "Well, that just happened." I'm not a fan of her or her weapons enough to make me want to stick with firebugs to unlock the upgrades. The sharpshooter for KF3 is Luna. Again, pretty simple title for a character who specializes in mid to long range shooting. This is aided by her special gadget where she summons Yondu's arrow from Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm not kidding, she shoots a little projectile that flies around and damages a bunch of targets, or returns to previous ones if there are less targets than attack slots. She was my favorite of the bunch. Her guns all feel faster than KF2 sharpshooter, and they have great punch to them. I love her final gun, which is like a cryo sniper that opens up and closes to re-rack itself after every shot. It's super satisfying. Say hello there to Obi, our medic for this game. His gadget is called Sanctuary. He places a big dome that is projected from a pylon, which he can then also choose to pick up. While in the Sanctuary, Zeds are slowed and players are healed. Outside of this, he uses SMGs, a laser rifle, and a beam weapon that does poison damage. He can heal from some of his weapons, and that healing is very important, especially on higher difficulties. More so than in previous games, since you can't just run and heal forever in Killing Floor 3. Obi was a pleasant surprise. This is the first time I really found myself enjoying a medic in the Killing Floor series. Now, instead of a berserker like the previous games, this time our melee user in Killing Floor 3 is a man named Nakata, with the title of Ninja. Now this reminds me a bit of the scrapped Yakuza class from KF2. But anyway, Nakata joins the fight with a rechargeable multi-charge grappling hook as his gadget. It pulls him towards an enemy, and upon arrival, he releases an EMP that stuns his target and nearby enemies as well. If you manage to hook a Husk, who are actually flying more often than not in this game, they're pulled down to you, which is a nice and smart change. Now unfortunately, Ninja is another big miss for me. His gadget is fun, but his starting sword and final dual swords don't really hit the mark. The melee isn't as satisfying as in Killing Floor 2, despite having all the same capabilities, and the bugginess of the weapon inspects for the primary melees don't let me appreciate the animations as much. His kunai, which you can toggle between melee or throwable, and his bow are both much more fun. However, Nakata speaks almost entirely in Japanese, which I do not speak. Much harder to appreciate the character, writing, and acting with that in mind. Once again, the specialist system is hurting me here. It's a case like Devlin where I can't connect with the character or weapons enough to want to dive into the skill trees. So like I said, I don't love abilities being tied to specific characters, but the abilities themselves are pretty fun. I was initially skeptical as hell when they announced this style for KF3, believing it to be chasing the trend of hero shooters. I still think it is, to be fair, but the execution is mostly solid outside of Devlin and Nakata. But I am bummed about the selection of classes. In KF2, my favorites were SWAT, Berserker, and Support. Here, SWAT is gone entirely, Berserker is turned into a ninja, which I don't like too much, and Support is turned into Technician, which is fun, but doesn't have quite the same impact. Even so, the abilities do feel like they add a really good amount of chaotic spice to the signature madness of Killing Floor matches. Speaking of, let's take a look at some other tweaks to the Killing Floor formula. So, in previous games, you could slam doors behind you and weld them shut to buy yourself time from an impending horde if you were isolated, or your group just needed a few extra seconds to recollect themselves. The welding is gone in KF3. You can close the doors and put certain traps on them to mess with Zeds that come through, like an R-rated version of Kevin McAllister, but the welding itself is just gone. You also used to have a recharging healing syringe that you could use to top yourself off or inject a teammate instead for a faster cooldown. That's also gone. You've got a limited amount of syringes in your inventory which you can use to heal as a consumable, but recharges are gone. I like this move to boost the power of the medic, but I can definitely see this being a bit annoying if you're interested in playing solo on high difficulties. To replenish these, you buy them from the trader during a round like you would guns, grenades, or armor. The neat thing with KF3 is the next trader location is halfway open before it becomes fully available at the end of the wave. If you're in a pinch, you can buy refills for your ammo and healing syringes from the half trader during a wave. Ammo boxes no longer spawn around the map in KF3, so that's your only method for getting more ammo if you need it during a wave. However, the ammo economy system actually seems to be pretty healthy. For us in Rusty Chains, it was pretty common that we could finish each wave with just enough ammo as long as we were hitting our shots, or we would run out right at the end for the last 1 or 2 Zeds. Knowing you've got just enough and maybe cut off from that trader is fun. It adds even more to the sigh of relief when you finish a wave where things got a bit crazy and you just barely scrape by. I like that feeling. It makes the momentary reprieve feel more like putting yourself back together before the next challenge, rather than just being a bit of buffer as you might feel in KF2. As you're running around frantically during the wave, you'll feel the new movement mechanics to help you out. Every specialist can sprint, but can also tap the button to dash in any direction. You can also slide and mantle, which feel pretty good. The dash in particular is super fun. I love just barely sliding out of the way from attacks at the last second to commit my counter. You can use new ladders and activate ziplines to move around the map easier as well. Speaking of maps, despite the new movement tools, they're definitely a bit smaller. Each one feels like it's made of 2 or 3 arenas with hallways or ziplines connecting them. I have mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, it makes sense for the gameplay since you typically hold in one area and there's a lot less running and kiting like in Killing Floor 2. It's very Killing Floor 1 in that sense. However, it did make me feel like there was less variety in the maps since I was seeing the same few rooms way more often. I also wasn't huge on the look of the maps, all of which are different shades of gray or dark blue with some sprinkles of things on fire thrown in. City Streets especially is brutalist cement architecture and just really unappealing to look at. With this being a sci-fi city, it was the only map in the beta that felt like it really took advantage of the setting, but it didn't really do anything with it. The setting and art design in general aren't really doing it for me, to be totally honest. I liked KF1 because it was kind of a grindhouse aesthetic. The second game started out as an extension of that with a bit of a sci-fi edge, before steadily progressing all in on the sci-fi. Now KF3 is just complete future sci-fi being set in the 2070s. This is a poor move. The environments and guns feel kinda generic. We've got stuff like a SCAR with heating coils, or a gun pretty much identical to the MP5, but it's called the MP6. It reminds me a lot of the C400 in Far Cry Blood Dragon, except that was parody, and this is unironically doing that and taking itself seriously. I've seen a lot of people referring to KF3 as an Apex Legends clone or something like a mobile game. I don't think it's that, but it does feel like Killing Floor 3 is a lot more lacking in identity than previous games in the series. I'm not lying when I say that when I was working on this video, my brother walked in, saw the game, and asked me if I was playing Destiny 1 due to some lower graphical fidelity and just the look and feel of the game. And that does hurt things, like the choppiness and cutoffs in enemy animations, for example, which make melee parries much harder. The identity issues even hit the soundtrack. It's still decent, but a lot of third-party bands like Demon Hunter are gone. It really hurts the presentation. There's no experience quite like being the last one standing, back against the wall, only for collapsing to start playing and hype you up. Killing Floor 3 doesn't have any standout songs that really give you that energy. I think the mobile game allegations come from all the crafting resources popping up on your screen during a match. It immediately reminded me of Marvel's Avengers, a game I like, but many people did not. Oh yeah, I haven't talked about crafting yet. KF3 is a weapon modding system. You earn schematic drops for mods by winning matches, and then use resources you scooped up to craft the mods. You can then save the modded gun as an alternate preset, which you can even rename, and then buy from the trader during the game. The more mods you apply, the more expensive it is to get from the trader. Sometimes these really change the feel of the gun, like a new elemental damage type or something like that. Other times the mods aren't that noticeable, like Payday 3. I think that basically covered all my thoughts on the Killing Floor 3 beta. It's a fairly mixed bag for me. A lot of people have been really hard on the game, especially the Killing Floor community. I think it's decent. I don't know that I enjoy it more than I like KF2, but I'm still excited to grab myself a copy and play with friends. I think the best way to summarize it is it's a lot like the Zeds. If you look at them for a second, you can see the series' history and lineage that comes through, but it's different enough that you really have to wonder if it does feel like Killing Floor. Are you gonna scoop up the game as well, or are you passing on this one? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, don't forget to spread the happy and stay rusty.